Should not be a surprise to those of you who know me well that my most favorite thing to do in the world is to have a conversation with a child. And if you've been around here at the CSC for very long, you may have noticed I have a tendency to reference my grandchildren in a homily now and then. Actually, all the time. Well, I'm not going to do that today, but I will read you a short poem about children. It was written by Anthony DeMello, whom some of you may know. He's a Jesuit priest from India. It's called I Chop Wood. When the Zen master attained enlightenment, he wrote the following lines to celebrate it. A wondrous marvel, I chop wood, I draw water from the well. After enlightenment, nothing really changes. The tree is still a tree. People are just what they were before, and so are you. You may continue to be as moody or even-tempered, as wise or foolish. The one difference is that you see things with a different eye. You are more detached from it all now, and your heart is full of wonder. And that is the essence of contemplation, the sense of wonder. Contemplation is different from ecstasy in that ecstasy leads to withdrawal. The enlightened contemplative continues to chop wood and draw water from the well. Contemplation is different from the perception of beauty, like a painting or a sunset, in that the perception of beauty produces aesthetic delight, whereas contemplation produces wonder, no matter what it observes, a sunset or a stone. This is the prerogative of children. They are so often in a state of wonder, so they easily slip into the kingdom. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but first I'd like to draw your attention to something that jumped off the page for me when I read today's gospel about the third time the risen Jesus appeared to his disciples. And what jumped out to me was the word presence. The disciples, having already encountered Jesus in 2 post-resurrection appearances, went back to work in their trade as fishermen. And after a night with no fisherman's luck, they were about to call it quits when they saw Jesus standing on the shore. But they did not realize it was Jesus. After Jesus suggested they cast their nets over the right side of the boat, their luck changed and they netted 153 large fish. And at that moment, Peter apparently recognizes Jesus and he says, "It is the Lord." Now, Jesus suggests that they all have a bit of breakfast, and the text says, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they realized it was the Lord. So these guys go from not recognizing that they were in the presence of Jesus to recognizing that they were in the presence of Jesus, yet not wanting to let on that they recognize him. Now, I wonder how many times that cycle was repeated for them as time went on. And I wonder if this also is what happens to each of us. I wonder if any of you have had an awareness that you were in God's presence at a particular point in time, followed by times where you do not recognize that you are in God's presence. I know that's been my experience. There have been a few times in my 80 years on this planet when I had a palpable experience of God's presence. Maybe only one that I can actually recall. There were times when I kind of knew that I was in the presence of God. And there were times when God didn't seem to be around, and I wondered where he had gone. And that's a very lonely feeling. Now, like many of you, I was baptized Catholic in the first month of my life, you older folks there. I attended Catholic grade school, high school, 1 year of Catholic college before switching to a secular school. I took courses on religion, philosophy, spirituality. I had 4 years of formation prior to my ordination as a deacon 33 years ago. I learned a lot about God, about the church, and things spiritual. It was all interesting and it all had value, but I'm not all that certain that it made me that aware of God's presence in my life. Now, in the past 10 years or so, I practiced a form of meditation known as centering prayer, which I know some of you also practice. I do that thanks to my wife, Mary, who introduced it to me. Note to husband, listen to your wives. Okay? You'll be a lot happier, okay? And better off, actually, too. Better person. I've also begun to learn the teachings of Catholic mystics like John of the Cross, St. Teresa, Julian of Norwich, Thomas Merton, to name a few. And I've come to realize that I can know a whole lot about God, yet not necessarily have an experience of God, an experience of God's presence in my life. You can look at it this way. You can read all there is to learn about a sport like baseball, about music theory, about love and romance, but that doesn't make you a great baseball player, a great musician, or a great lover. There's a vast difference between knowing about something and actually doing or experiencing something. I think it's the same with God. We can know about God, yet not actually know or experience God. Because to know God, we must have an experience of God. Now, any idea any of us have about God is not God. Every idea about God is infinitely less than God. We need to experience the presence of God, not just the idea of God. It's similar to relationships that we have with other people. There have been music actresses with whom I was infatuated with in my youth. Sophia Loren comes to mind. Any of you older people remember her? Yeah, she was something, okay. But that was based on what I knew about them from movies and interviews. It was just an intellectual infatuation. In reality, I knew nothing about any of them as persons. All my real-life girlfriends back in my teenage years were in love with Elvis Presley, and they never met the guy, you know. And I guess young men today are in love with Taylor Swift or somebody like that. Never met her. Knowing all there was to know about a famous person is not the same as having an actual experiential relationship with them. And you just can't have a real relationship with someone without experiencing their actual presence. You just can't. So how do we experience the presence of God? Let me tell you what I've learned from the mystics and what I've come to experience now and then as I've tried with varying degrees of success to put into practice what I've learned. And this is all available to anybody who wants to look into this and devote the time and energy to it and accept the grace that comes with it. Because the reality is that God is, always has been, and always will be present to us, whether we recognize it or not. If God was not present to us, we just wouldn't be existing. We wouldn't be, okay? But it's the lack of recognition of God's presence that's our major problem. And like the disciples on that beach 2,000 years ago, we fail to recognize the presence of Jesus or the presence of God in our lives. And in those moments when we are aware of God's presence, it naturally, organically requires a response from us. And I wonder if we, like the disciples, dare not ask God, "Who are you?" For should we do so, like the disciples, okay, something might be required of us. Peter found out what was required of him. He was asked by Jesus, "Do you love me?" Not once, but 3 times. And when Peter, in apparent exasperation, said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you," he found out what was required of God, what was required of love. And this is what it was. Jesus told Peter 2 things. Feed my sheep and follow me. Be a servant to others as I have been a servant to you. Now, we can't travel back in time and be with the risen Jesus on that beach and experience his presence there. But the good news is that we don't have to. In his last words to his disciples before he ascended into heaven, we hear in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus say, "I am with you always until the end of the age." And in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, we hear God speaking through the prophet Jeremiah years before Jesus. In chapter 23 says, Am I a God who is near, says the Lord, and not a God far off? Do I not fill heaven and earth? And the cloistered nun Julian of Norwich in the 14th century said, God is nearer to us than our own soul. God is the ground in whom our soul stands. Our soul is kindly rooted in God in endless love. So where is it that we seek the presence of God? We start with the knowledge that God is omnipresent, whether we know it or not. God is always with us. If that were not true, as I've just said, we just wouldn't be here. In the Acts of the Apostles, we see Paul in chapter 17 having a conversation with the people of Athens, who were really heady guys, okay? And they were talking about God. And so Paul ends up saying, in him we live and move and have our being. We live, we move, we have our very being in God. So one place to seek God's presence is within our very selves. And that's almost too much to believe and too much to bear. And so does God actually reside in me, within each of you? Yes. And that's in that part of us we call the spirit or the soul that's always joined with God in absolute and total unity. And so that means that deep within who we are always in the presence of God. It's really kind of simple. We are physical, finite beings with infinite souls. Our finite limitations keep us from recognizing this beautiful reality. Our finite minds and our finite brains cannot fully grasp that which is infinite. It's an impossibility, okay? But God gives us many opportunities to experience his infinite presence. Where? In all that God created. It's like sensing the presence of a great author in her written words, or the presence of a great composer in listening to the music he wrote. We can get glimpses of God's presence in everything we experience with our five senses. I was thinking about this. Where do you feel moved in the depths of your being? Gazing wordlessly at a sunset? Sound of the wind rustling the branches of a tree? Power of a thunderstorm? The gentle pattern of the rain? Quiet of a snowfall? The song of a bird? And the smell of a rose? And the solemnity of a great forest? In the smile of a baby, or the squeal of delight from a little child? Or in the embrace of someone that you love? So God is present in these everyday moments of our everyday lives. It's our job to recognize that presence, because love never forces itself on you. It just presents itself for free acceptance. And recognition of presence precedes acceptance. So Jesus in Matthew chapter 18 said, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. See, a little child is so innocent, so straightforward, so trusting, so accepting. And a sad reality that our adult egos get in our own way. We want to be in charge. We want proof. We must always win and never lose. We want to know what's in it for us rather than what's best for everyone else. And we find it hard to imitate the Son of Man, the human one, who said he came to serve, not to be served. So developing an awareness of God's presence, it's a real good antidote for those ego limitations of our human nature. A child doesn't need to do anything to experience wonder. They just experience it in the simplest of things. And I wonder if their souls are maybe so joined to God that they experience God's presence in ordinary moments, even though they don't have the language or brain development to articulate it. Now, maybe that's because they were so recently breathed by God into existence on this earth as compared to those of us who've been around 20, 30, 50, 80 years. That sense of wonder, that awareness of the sacredness of everything, that recognition of the presence of God in the ordinary moments of life, Those are all hallmarks of the hallmarks of the kingdom of heaven that Jesus spoke about. Like it said in the poem, children are so often in a state of wonder, so they easily slip into the kingdom. And do we not all wish to slip into the kingdom? I think we do. And to that end, it's for us who are adults to learn the lessons taught in the gospel today. When God asks you, or when Jesus asks you, do you love me? We should stop, think about that before we too hastily answer, okay? It's in the depths of our being, it's in our spiritual DNA to answer like Peter, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. So having said yes in that way, we then listen to these last lines of the gospel passage. When Jesus had said this, he said to Peter, follow me. That, my friends, is what is asked of each of us today. We can more easily follow Jesus when we realize we don't have to do so in our own power, when we recognize that we are always in the presence of God, who loves us, sustains us, and holds us in the palm of his hand.